Stephanie Miller fumbled with the disassembled M4 carbine parts spread across her workbench at Camp Lejeune's armory, her blonde hair falling from its bun as she dropped the bolt carrier group for the third time that morning. Around her, Marines waiting for weapons maintenance exchanged exasperated glances as the base armorer struggled with what should have been routine work. "Miller, are you serious right now?" called Staff Sergeant Jenkins, watching as she scrambled to retrieve the fallen component. "That's the fourth weapon you've mishandled today. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? Let us know in the comments. And if you believe that heroes come in the most unexpected forms, don't forget to subscribe. How the hell did you get this job?" The Marines in line snickered, their patience wearing thin as their training schedule fell further behind. What none of them knew was that beneath Stephanie's civilian contractor uniform lay scars that told the story of a day in Fallujah that had earned her the Navy Cross, the second highest decoration awarded for valor in combat, and one that only 5 women had received since 9/11. At 33, Stephanie was younger than most civilian armorers at the Marine base, having been hired just 6 months earlier with what appeared to be basic qualifications. Her personnel file listed prior military experience and a 2-year apprenticeship at a gunsmith shop in Jacksonville, North Carolina. The base logistics officer had questioned her hiring, but with qualified armorers in short supply and weapons maintenance backlogged, they had taken a chance on her. Now, as she struggled with basic assembly procedures, many wondered if that decision had been a serious mistake. Stephanie's day had started at 5:15 a.m. with her usual 3-mile run along the perimeter of Camp Lejeune, the North Carolina humidity already thick despite the early hour. As she showered and dressed in her civilian contractor uniform, navy blue work pants and a gray polo shirt with the Marine Corps base insignia, she had carefully checked that her long-sleeved undershirt was securely in place, hiding the scars that ran from her right hand up to her shoulder. 6 years of reconstructive surgeries had improved function, but left unmistakable evidence of the trauma her body had endured. The armory was already busy when she arrived at 7 a.m., Marines lined up to check out weapons for the day's training exercises or turn in firearms needing maintenance. Stephanie took her position behind the reinforced counter, mentally preparing for another day of deliberate incompetence. "Morning, Miller," grunted Chief Warrant Officer Blackburn, the Marine in charge of the armory. "Try not to break anything today, all right?" "Yes, sir," she replied quietly, keeping her eyes down as she logged into the weapons tracking system. The morning proceeded as usual, Stephanie fumbling with paperwork, dropping tools, and generally appearing overwhelmed by the technical aspects of weapons maintenance. Each mistake was carefully calculated to reinforce her image as barely competent while still accomplishing the required work. It was a delicate balance. She needed to appear inefficient without actually compromising weapon functionality or safety. By 10:30 a.m., her workbench was covered with disassembled M4 carbines awaiting maintenance. As she struggled with one particularly stubborn bolt assembly, Staff Sergeant Jenkins approached the counter, impatience written across his face. "Miller, my platoon needs these weapons back by 1300. At the rate you're going, we'll get them next week." "I'm working as fast as I can, Staff Sergeant," she replied, deliberately dropping a cleaning rod to reinforce her image. Jenkins shook his head in disgust. "This is ridiculous. Where's Martinez? At least he knows which end of the rifle the bullet comes out of." "Staff Sergeant Martinez is on leave until Thursday," Blackburn interjected, approaching from the office. "Miller's all we've got." Jenkins leaned over the counter, lowering his voice. "With all due respect, sir, how did she even get this job? My 8-year-old nephew could field strip an M4 faster than her." Stephanie kept her head down, pretending not to hear as she fumbled with the weapon components. This was familiar territory. The contempt, the dismissal, the assumption of incompetence. It was exactly the cover she needed. "Just get it done, Miller," Blackburn ordered before leading Jenkins away to discuss alternative options. Alone at her workbench, Stephanie allowed her hands to move with slightly more efficiency, though still well below her actual capabilities. In reality, she could disassemble, clean, and reassemble an M4 blindfolded in under 2 minutes, a skill she had demonstrated countless times during her 6 years as a Force Reconnaissance Marine. But that wasn't who she was supposed to be now. Not anymore. At noon, Stephanie took her lunch break, retreating to the small break room behind the armory, where she could eat alone. As she unwrapped her sandwich, the door opened and Lieutenant Colonel Maxwell entered, the base's new executive officer who had arrived just 2 weeks earlier. "Don't get up," he said as she started to stand. Just grabbing coffee. Stephanie nodded and returned to her lunch, hoping he would leave quickly. New officers always meant additional scrutiny, questions about procedures and personnel that could potentially expose inconsistencies in her background. Instead of leaving, Maxwell poured his coffee and then sat down across from her. "You're Miller, right? The armorer?" "Yes, sir," she replied, keeping her eyes on her sandwich. "Heard there have been some complaints about the speed of weapons maintenance lately." Stephanie tensed slightly. "I'm still learning some of the newer systems, sir. I'm working on improving my efficiency." Maxwell studied her for a moment. "Where did you serve before this?" The question was casual but dangerous. Her cover story included minimal prior service, just enough to explain basic familiarity with military weapons, but not enough to suggest advanced training. 4 years in the Corps, sir. Admin clerk at Camp Pendleton. Nothing exciting." "And after that?" "Apprenticed at a gunsmith shop in Jacksonville for a couple years before applying for this position." Maxwell nodded slowly, taking a sip of his coffee. "Interesting career path from admin to armorer." "Needed a change, sir," she replied with a carefully measured shrug. "Figured I'd learn a practical skill." The lieutenant colonel seemed about to ask another question when his radio crackled. "XO, this is base security. We have a situation at the main gate that requires your attention." "On my way," Maxwell responded, standing. He gave Stephanie one last appraising look before leaving, his coffee half finished on the table. She released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Something about Maxwell's questions felt different from the usual inquiries, more targeted, as if he was looking for specific inconsistencies. She would need to be even more careful around him. The afternoon brought a new challenge as a platoon from the 2nd Marine Raider Battalion arrived for weapons checkout. The Raiders were Marine Special Operations, elite warriors with advanced weapons training and experience. They would be more likely to notice subtle mistakes or inconsistencies in her work. "We need 15 M4s with SOP Mod Block 2 kits," the Raider platoon sergeant informed her, sliding a requisition form across the counter, "and 5 M110 semi-automatic sniper systems." Stephanie nodded, deliberately hesitating as she processed the paperwork. "The M1110s will take some time to prep, Sergeant. We've got a training exercise at 1600, need them ready by then." His tone made it clear this wasn't a request. As she gathered the requested weapons, Stephanie carefully maintained her facade of nervous inefficiency while ensuring the firearms were actually in perfect working order. The Raiders watched with poorly concealed impatience as she checked each weapon in the system, her movements deliberately slower than necessary. One of the Raiders, a staff sergeant with multiple combat deployment patches, leaned over to his companion. "This is painful to watch. Is she new or something?" "Been here 6 months from what I heard," the other replied. "Supposedly has prior Marine experience, but I'm not seeing it." As she handed over the last of the M4s, she accidentally on purpose dropped the weapon. The Raider staff sergeant caught it reflexively before it hit the counter, his expression darkening. "Jesus Christ, be careful! These aren't toys!" "Sorry, Sergeant," she mumbled, keeping her eyes down. "Maybe find another line of work," he suggested coldly, as the Raiders gathered their equipment and left. By 5:30 p.m., the armory was finally quieting down as the day shift ended. Stephanie remained at her workbench, catching up on the backlog of maintenance requests that had accumulated. Blackburn stopped by on his way out. "I'm heading out, Miller. Lock up when you're done, and for God's sake try to get through that pile before tomorrow." "Yes, sir," she replied. "I'll stay late if I need to." Once alone, Stephanie allowed herself to work at something closer to her actual ability, still not at full speed, but efficiently enough to make progress on the backlog. The solitude of the empty armory was a relief after a day of maintaining her cover under constant scrutiny. At 7:15 p.m., she heard the armory door open. Looking up, she saw Lieutenant Colonel Maxwell entering with a folder under his arm. "Still here, Miller?" he asked, approaching her workbench. Stephanie quickly reverted to her fumbling persona. "Yes, sir. Trying to catch up on the backlog." Maxwell nodded, watching as she deliberately misaligned a gas tube during reassembly. "You know, it's interesting. I've been reviewing personnel files since taking over as XO, and something about yours caught my attention." Stephanie's heart rate increased slightly, though she kept her expression neutral. "Sir, your background check lists a previous address in Oceanside, California, near Camp Pendleton, but there's no record of you ever being stationed there as an admin clerk." She had prepared for this possibility. I lived off base with my then boyfriend. Sir, he was the Marine, not me. I just picked up the job at Pendleton because it was convenient. Maxwell seemed to consider this. I see. And your weapons training? Even basic armorer certification requires significant technical knowledge. The gunsmith I apprenticed with was very thorough, sir, former Marine himself. Maxwell placed the folder he was carrying on her workbench. The thing is, Miller, I made some calls to that gunsmith shop in Jacksonville. They've never heard of you. Stephanie's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around the cleaning rod in her hand. Her mind raced through contingency options. Had her cover been blown? Was this an official inquiry, or was Maxwell acting alone? There must be some mistake, sir. I worked there for almost 2 years. No mistake, Maxwell replied, opening the folder. In fact, there's no record of a Stephanie Miller with your social security number ever serving in the Marine Corps in any capacity. This was bad. Someone had dug deeper than the carefully constructed background should have allowed. Stephanie maintained her confused expression while calculating escape routes and response options. Sir, I don't understand. My paperwork should all be in order. I can provide copies of my discharge. That won't be necessary, Maxwell interrupted, removing a photograph from the folder and placing it on the workbench. Stephanie glanced down and felt her blood freeze. The photo showed a younger version of herself in full combat gear, face partially obscured by camouflage paint but still recognizable, standing with a Force Recon team in Fallujah, a photograph that should have been classified, that shouldn't exist in any accessible database. Where did you get that? She asked, her voice unconsciously shifting to a more authoritative tone. Maxwell noted the change immediately. So you do recognize it. Stephanie realized her mistake and tried to recover. No, I just... Staff Sergeant Stephanie Miller, Maxwell continued, Force Reconnaissance, 2nd Battalion, deployed to Iraq 3 times between 2006 and 2009. Awarded the Navy Cross for actions during the Battle of Fallujah, where you single-handedly eliminated 4 enemy fighters while dragging 2 wounded Marines to safety, despite sustaining severe injuries from an IED explosion. The carefully constructed facade of incompetence fell away as Stephanie straightened, meeting Maxwell's gaze directly for the first time. Who are you really, sir? Because no lieutenant colonel who's been on base for 2 weeks should have access to that information. Maxwell smiled slightly. Perceptive. You're right. I'm not just the new XO. He removed a credential wallet from his pocket and opened it, revealing a Naval Criminal Investigative Service badge. Lieutenant Commander James Maxwell, NCIS. I'm here investigating a series of weapons thefts from Marine bases along the East Coast. Stephanie's expression hardened. And you think I'm involved? Initially, you were a person of interest. Your background didn't check out. You had access to the armory, and you appeared suspiciously incompetent, perhaps deliberately so. And now? Now I'm more interested in why a highly decorated Force Recon Marine with a Navy Cross is pretending to be a bumbling civilian armorer. Maxwell leaned forward. What's your real mission here, Staff Sergeant? Stephanie remained silent, evaluating her options. Her cover was clearly blown, but revealing her actual purpose could compromise an operation years in the making. Maxwell seemed to read her thoughts. This doesn't have to be adversarial. If you're here on official business, we can coordinate, but I need to know what's going on. Before Stephanie could respond, the armory door burst open. 3 men in civilian clothes entered, weapons drawn. They weren't wearing uniforms, but their tactical movement and weapon handling screamed military training. "Nobody move!" the lead man shouted. "Hands where we can see them!" Maxwell reached for his sidearm, but froze when one of the intruders trained a weapon directly at his head. "Federal agent, stand down." "We know exactly who you are, Lieutenant Commander," the lead intruder replied, "and we know why you're here. Unfortunately for you, our timetable has moved up." Stephanie assessed the situation with the calm clarity that had once been her hallmark in combat. The intruders were well armed and positioned to control both exits. They moved with the precision of trained operators, likely former military, possibly special operations. "You," the leader addressed Stephanie, "open the weapons cage. We're taking the shipment that arrived yesterday." She realized immediately what they were after, a consignment of new M27 infantry automatic rifles that had arrived for the Raider Battalion, advanced weapons worth millions on the black market. "I don't have access to that cage," she lied, buying time. Only Chief Warrant Officer Blackburn has the combination. The leader stepped forward, pressing his pistol against Maxwell's temple. Try again. You're the armorer on duty. You have access to everything in here. Stephanie raised her hand slowly. Okay, take it easy. I'll open it. As she moved toward the secure cage at the back of the armory, her mind raced through options. The intruders had made a critical mistake. They had assumed she was exactly what she appeared to be, a nervous civilian contractor out of her depth. Faster, the leader ordered as she deliberately fumbled with the keys. I'm trying, she replied, reverting to her nervous persona while surreptitiously pressing the silent alarm button hidden beneath the key cabinet, a security feature most armorers didn't even know existed. The cage door swung open, revealing racks of new M27 rifles still in their shipping containers. Load them up, the leader ordered his men. All of them. As two of the intruders entered the cage, Stephanie caught Maxwell's eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. The NCIS agent understood immediately. She was signaling that she was ready to act. You won't get away with this, Maxwell said, deliberately drawing the leader's attention. This base will be locked down in minutes. We'll be long gone by then, the leader replied confidently. And you'll be... Maxwell reacted immediately, tackling one of the remaining intruders as he emerged from the weapons cage. The third man turned his weapon toward Stephanie, but she was already moving, closing the distance before he could fire. Her right leg swept his feet from under him, and as he fell, she delivered a precise strike to his throat that left him gasping for air. The entire confrontation lasted less than 10 seconds. As Maxwell secured the conscious intruder with flex cuffs, Stephanie checked the other two. This one's just unconscious, she reported, securing the leader's hands. The other needs medical attention. Base security should be here any minute, Maxwell said, retrieving his weapon. That was impressive work, Staff Sergeant, not what I expected from someone who's been dropping rifles for 6 months. Stephanie allowed herself a small smile. Force Recon trains for the unexpected. Within minutes, the armory was swarming with security forces and NCIS agents. As the intruders were taken into custody, Maxwell pulled Stephanie aside. I think it's time you told me what you're really doing here, he said quietly. Stephanie hesitated, then nodded toward his pocket. You might want to check your secure line. I imagine you have a message waiting. Maxwell raised an eyebrow but pulled out his encrypted phone. Sure enough, a high-priority message had arrived during the confrontation. As he read it, his expression shifted from confusion to understanding. Operation Broken Arrow, he read. You're the inside operative. Stephanie nodded. For the past 6 months, we've been tracking weapons thefts across multiple bases, building a case against the entire network. Tonight's attempt was unexpected. They moved earlier than intelligence suggested. Why the elaborate cover? The Incompetence Act? The thefts were sophisticated, inventory numbers altered, paperwork perfect. It had to be an inside job with someone who had armory access. If I appeared competent, I might have been seen as a threat. As the bumbling new civilian who could barely function, I was invisible. They spoke freely around me, never considering I might understand what they were discussing. Maxwell shook his head in amazement. And the Navy Cross? Your real background? Classified after my injuries in Fallujah, Stephanie explained. The official record shows I received a medical discharge and disappeared into civilian life. Only a handful of people know I continued working for naval intelligence after recovery. Before Maxwell could respond, the armory door opened and a man in civilian clothes entered, flashing credentials to the security personnel. Stephanie recognized him immediately. Captain Thomas Harrison, her handler from Naval Intelligence. Staff Sergeant Miller, Harrison acknowledged with a nod. I see your cover is blown. Couldn't be helped, sir, she replied. It was either break character or let them walk out with 30 M27s and a hostage. Harrison turned to Maxwell. Lieutenant Commander, I assume you've received authorization to be briefed on Operation Broken Arrow? Maxwell nodded. Just came through, though I would have appreciated being informed there was another federal operation running on my base. Compartmentalization, Harrison replied unapologetically. Staff Sergeant Miller has spent 6 months establishing her cover to infiltrate this weapons trafficking ring. We couldn't risk exposure. As the three of them moved to a private office to debrief, Stephanie felt a strange mixture of relief and regret. The operation was effectively over, her cover blown, her role as the incompetent armorer finished. Part of her would miss the simplicity of that role, even with the daily humiliation it entailed. Later that night, as the base returned to normal operations and the investigation into the trafficking ring expanded, Stephanie sat in her small on-base apartment, her Navy Cross certificate, normally hidden in a locked safe, now sitting on her coffee table. A knock at her door revealed Maxwell, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this after all the debriefing," he said, offering her one. "Thanks," she accepted it gratefully. "Come in." Maxwell entered, his eyes immediately falling on the Navy Cross certificate. "That's not something you see every day." Stephanie shrugged. "I keep it put away most of the time." "Why?" Maxwell asked, genuinely curious. "Most people would display that prominently." "Because it reminds me of the worst day of my life," she replied honestly. 2 Marines died despite everything I did. The medal doesn't change that." Maxwell nodded in understanding. "What happens now? With your cover blown, I assume you'll be reassigned." "New base, new identity, new mission," Stephanie confirmed. "It's what I do." "Must be lonely," Maxwell observed. "Constantly pretending to be someone you're not." Stephanie considered this. "Sometimes, but it's also necessary. The weapons these guys were stealing weren't just being sold for profit. They were going to terrorist cells domestic and abroad. The work matters, even if no one ever knows you did it." "Especially then," she replied with conviction. As Maxwell left, Stephanie carefully returned her Navy Cross certificate to its hiding place. Tomorrow she would receive her new assignment, her new identity, her new mission. The nervous armorer who dropped every weapon would disappear, replaced by whatever role naval intelligence needed her to play next.